the ASTDA Distinguished Career Award, and I am delighted to introduce Drs. Teresa Vadiger and Gregory Zimmett, who are going to introduce our winner.
Step one, don't trip coming up to the stage. Okay, I'm Teresa Vadiger, and Greg will talk after me. I have the distinct pleasure to co-introduce Dr. Dennis Fortenberry for the ASTDA Distinguished Career Award. I met Dennis as a resident on my adolescent medicine rotation over a decade ago. When I began my fellowship training, he became my mentor, and that relationship has continued through today. It is difficult to distill down what he has contributed to the field into this short introduction. We have a time limit. He is, and always will be a well-respected, admired clinician and researcher. The positive impact on the lives of his colleagues, trainees, mentees, and patients simply cannot be adequately quantified. His research has contributed greatly to the field. He is a prolific writer and continues to write extensively on the topics that he is passionate about. The themes of his research include sexuality, sexual health, STDs, and HIV prevention. And these themes are also reflected in his clinical work. Additionally, he has contributed to the development of the next generation of our STI clinicians and researchers. From personal experience, he has a way of nudging you out of your comfort zone. So you are taking the next steps, you are working on your next goals, and that you're able to articulate those goals to folks who are outside of your field. And when you meet those goals or surpass them, he takes immense pleasure in watching you take those steps. I, for one, will always be grateful for his mentorship, insights, thoughtful input, and of course, his consistent, intentional nudging me out of my comfort zone. I will now pass the mic over to Greg to finish out this introduction.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. It is a true pleasure and honor to co-introduce Dr. Dennis Fortenberry for ASTDA's Distinguished Career Award. I first met Dennis over 30 years ago here in Chicago at a Society for Adolescent Medicine meeting as we were both preparing to move to Indiana University School of Medicine. For those 30 years, Dennis has been an exceptional colleague, collaborator, peer, mentor, and friend. From personal experience and observation, I can confirm Dr. Vadiger's comment that Dennis nudges people. That's a gentle word for it, but nudges people, and to be honest, groups of people out of their comfort zones. For example, across his stellar career, he has sought to challenge the status quo. When people would tell him, you can't do that research, it isn't possible, Dennis would proceed to show them how wrong they were. Two excellent examples of this are the Young Women's Project and the Young Men's Project, both of which were longitudinal examinations of sexual behavior and STI acquisition, which involved an extraordinary multiple levels of data collection, which included daily diaries, quarterly in-depth partner-specific interviews, annual surveys, and regular collection of biological data on STI incidents. Reflected in this research is one of Dennis's enduring interests and passions, which is to bridge the divide between the STI research community and the sexual behavior research community. This interest was a major driver of his close engagement with the Kinsey Institute, particularly, but not solely, when Dr. John Bancroft was the director. This slightly dated photo that you see shows Dennis, Don Orr, and me, I apologize for the mustache, in front of the Kinsey Institute in Bloomington, Indiana, after meeting with John and other members of the Institute in 1997. Of the three of us, only Don Orr hasn't changed a bit since the photo was taken, which is almost true, actually. But Dennis also continues to be a fierce advocate for sexual health and gender health, which has been particularly challenging during these politically charged and divisive times, and it's been a real problem in Indiana. Despite this, he remains steadfast in his commitment to promote sexual health, gender health, and STI prevention and treatment through research, provision of clinical services, and advocacy, not to mention mentorship. He's been an amazing mentor to so many. So here's to Dr. Dennis Fortenberry, friend, colleague, mentor, advocate, researcher extraordinaire, and a great family person as well. And now the well-deserved recipient of the ASTDA Distinguished Career Award. Congratulations, Dennis.
I'm so happy to be here. And in addition to just recognizing everything that ASTDA has done in my life, there are a lot of other people to at least try to capture all of the people that I've mentored. I'm so grateful for having a chance to share in their journeys. My colleagues that have been such an inspiration to me and often have become friends and some of the best friends of my life. People that I still miss because they've moved away from Indiana. People in my family, my daughter Emma, our daughter Emma is here for their love and support and putting up with decades of jokes at holiday dinners about sauces and gravies that look like purulent discharges. And to Lori, for loving me so much and still adoring me, despite the beard. So the topic that I wanted to talk about is one that I've raised before. I first talked about this in Dublin at the ASTDA World 5 years ago. But things have changed a bit. I've continued to work with this theme a bit. I've expanded it. I've done some other things. And I've had the advantage of beginning to look at the work that I've done and try to interpret it in some sense as a whole and find the story there that makes sense to me, which is really what I'm looking for. So I'm going to look behind. As it turns out, I'm not that interested in stuff I've done. I'm mostly interested in what comes next. And what I've done is done. I'm finished with it. But things that I feel are important, this focus on sexuality, gender, identity, focused on adolescence for the most part, but a lot of other important work with adults as well. A lot of focus recently on transgender, non-binary and queer youth, which has really become the place where my passion has come to a point in ways that I never expected it in my career. A focus on sexual justice, a focus on sexual well-being that has been a project for about 5 years with colleagues at the University of Glasgow, putting together a measure to separate sexual well-being from sexual health, and then put the measure into play at the 4th decennial NatCell measurement in the United Kingdom. A lot of work on thinking about how to collect data from young people particularly, and how to collect data that measured them in their space, that looked at them in their space, and let us understand what their lives were like moment to moment with or without sex happening with them. A lot of stuff on sexual behaviors, most recently some stuff with colleagues in the University of Indiana University on sexual choking that's probably porn-inspired, but probably causes outcomes that look a lot like brain chronic concussion syndromes. A lot of work recently on sexual pleasure. I had the privilege of being part of the working group that put together the World Association for Sexual Health Declaration on Sexual Pleasure as a Human Right. A lot of work into a background. I'll show you some of that as I go along. A lot of stuff on sexual interactions, thinking about what happens when two people get together, two or more people sometimes. I got really interested in the idea of sexual trust, this idea that something about people's sexual relationships requires something to happen that my patients told me over and over again was a more important prophylactic than latex. And that was the reason that they stopped using those. I didn't understand trust until I really started taking it apart and asking what it means to trust someone enough to have sex with them. A lot of work on sexual health over the years, a lot of work with research methodology, again, thinking about how to make research something that people wanted to be part of, that they would enjoy and in fact find meaningful in their lives. And it was amazing in that Young Women's Project, the grief that those young women felt when we stopped the study. And one of the messages that I've learned to tell people is when you do research with people and it means something to them, make sure you say goodbye in the right way. A lot of work recently, not so recently anymore, on genital microbiome, some of the most earliest stuff, especially with peripubertal young people, the genital microbiome of people with penises, more recently looking at associations of genital microbiome and dysmenorrhea. Sexually transmitted infections pretty much covered the waterfront for a lot of things over time, mostly with adolescents, though, where the story's been a little different. And then approaches to clinical care, gender-affirming care, stigma, shame. I've covered all of the things that make people feel bad about themselves. And trauma, and I'm going to try to knit those things together. I did want to say that there's a few things that have changed over the 40 years I've been in the field. Nearly all of HIV has come. We've discovered the significance fairly fully of chlamydia trachomatis as an STI. We've been in this race for my entire career with Neisseria gonorrhea against antibiotic resistance. We were still using fairly low doses of penicillin when I started working in STIs. We've had this immense growth and understanding of STI microbial genetics, its transmission, its immunopathology, almost everything that you can imagine that's changed so much in 40 years. We've understood. When I was in medical school, the big money was on herpes simplex as the cause of sexually transmitted cervical cancer. That was a big letdown for the people that knew. And we created a vaccine that's incredibly effective, one of the biggest public health victories, I think, least of the past 50 years. Exquisitely sensitive diagnostics for almost everything. The perpetual surprises of that sly fox syphilis that continues to bedevil us, I think, in many ways. And for me, the publication of The Hidden Epidemic, because that was the first place that I saw stigma identified as a central part of the epidemiology of sexually transmitted infections and given serious attention as a potential focus for scientific attention. And given all that, that's, especially as I was putting this together, thinking about why have all this progress, this really sensational amount of time and effort and money, and all these things, why have STI continued to be so difficult to successfully address from a public health perspective? And that was summarized in this nice sort of extension, if you will, of The Hidden Epidemic in terms of the conclusions that the way that we were addressing sexual health as a means of controlling STIs had failed, and that we needed a new approach. And I think that approach has to do with addressing stigma, finally. We still punish, and I use punish deliberately here, people for expressing and experiencing their sexuality and partnered sex. We torture them for it. We persecute them for their sexuality. And I've chosen this one map, and I could have chosen 1,000, just to show that in this country, much less the rest of the world, we pass laws that deliberately identify, marginalize, exclude people, put them in jail, and harass them for their sexuality, and incite others to view them with disdain and commit violence toward them. But we've come a long way. And one of the things that really remarkably happened that I never thought would happen was a couple of years ago, we have a national strategy to address sexually transmitted infections. If you haven't read it, take some time, have a little wine, not too much, and read it, because it's a remarkable vision for what sexual transmitted infections control and prevention can look like. And I pulled from that one objective because it particularly matches my theme, Objective 4, which is to expand access to trauma-informed, stigma and discrimination-free, culturally competent, appropriate STD prevention, care, and treatment. And that focuses on something that I think is really important for all of us. It's something that we wrote a commentary that appeared a year or so ago with the ASTDA Executive Committee, and that is look first at home. Look at the work that we do. Look at the clinical work that we do. Look at the design of our clinical programs. Look at the way we talk to people. Look at the way we relate to communities, and recognize that we are often responsible for reproducing stigma within our own house. And if we don't get our house together, we can't expect the rest of the world to do a better job. And there were things in this same commentary that you've heard multiple times through the course of the meeting so far, shifting from where we've been to person-centered approaches and moving toward thinking about how to operationalize that, thinking how to build infrastructures that make that happen and reward people for doing it. Do some meaningful clinical community engagement. And that means meaningful decisional input from the communities that we work with. That doesn't mean a focus group. That doesn't mean an advisory board. That means people coming to the table with the things that they ask for and need and being able to get it. And trauma-informed interaction, care, practice, and research. Not many people think about making their research trauma-informed and trauma-responsive, but I think that's part of our job as well. We know how to do this. This has been an evolving technology, if you will, a way of thinking for 25 or 30 years. We know how to do this. It requires, however, an intentionality and a plan and a professionalized infrastructure to do this. Now, I love the strategic plan. There's something missing, and you could probably guess what that is. it didn't have much sex in there. We used to walk around saying, "Where's the sex?" when we came to this meeting. But it's important to remember that this is such an important part of people's lives, and be able to view sex and sexuality as assets that people have, that it's central to many, if not all, of our identities, the relationships that matter to us. They define us in many ways. Making an emphasis on the rewarding and non-procreative aspects of sex, which has gotten harder, I believe. Recognition of diversity of motivations, meanings. This is a place for diversity. And then if you require evidence to say why is sex important, recognizing that including sex allows you to do a better job of STI prevention than making it a risk. So this is the way I've put it all together. And this includes the work that I've done in terms of sexual pleasure, redefining my approach, my thoughts about what sexual health means, incorporating a multidimensional measure of sexual well-being, thinking carefully about what sexual justice means and how we implement that every time we see a patient, every time the clinic door opens, every time someone stops, they're thinking about pleasure, but about justice and pleasure. So this is where I've gotten to, and this represents a ton of work. And then over the past year, the state of Indiana has passed multiple laws affecting the care of gender diverse youth. Now I've spent about 10 years now thinking about these young people, understanding them, developing, implementing clinical programs for their care that didn't exist before, reaching out to communities, teaching, advocating, trying to get my own hospital system to do a better job of making its own space safe for gender diverse young people. And then the state of Indiana started passing laws that marginalized them, made them invisible, put them aside, reduced them to nothing, and it nearly killed me. I've never felt so bereft in my life. And these are things that I know many people go through. But it felt like, in addition to just the daily discussions with families, with the young people themselves, what are we going to do? How are we going to get through this? What can we do? I felt like I'd betrayed these young people, that this had happened, and I was put in charge, or at least responsible, for writing the protocols for taking the hormones, particularly, and other aspects of gender-affirming care away from them. And then the state passed a law completely banning this care. We have been doing a lot of work, and right now it's on. They have a federal injunction against its implementation. But what I needed from this, I lost track. Although early on I started thinking about what do we need to do. So I started reframing some of the studies that we had in the field, started rethinking about that. I started thinking about doing rapid community assessments to assess the impact of this law, starting to put together cohorts to study longitudinal outcomes of the implementation of these laws. And what I found was what made me finally recover myself in relationship to this part of my passion was research. And I've always considered sex research to be a subversive activity. And I've said that, and people get a little uncomfortable with that. But it is the place where we can respond to injustice. We can use, and I could use the tools that I have, the ones that I've mastered, in the service of this. And there are things that you've also heard already, this idea of being really thoughtful about how our research happens, making sure that we're apportioning the benefits of research for the people that we're working with. And that my last point is this, what I've come to consider a moral imperative of justice-focused research that really rejects this post-colonial relationship of researcher institutions and funders to come to better focus on the communities that we serve. And so I've recovered. I've come back to some equanimity, some perspective, some sense of all the joy that I've had. Amazing gift of joy, which is not something that I thought I had the quality or the character to do. Being joyful is hard to do, actually, because you have to trust yourself in order to do that. And I recovered some of that. And I thought back not just in terms of preparing to be here, but things that I've done, like going down to Bloomington, Indiana, sitting in the basement of a college bar with about 30 or 40 people talking about sex on a Sunday evening. And if you can't tell what the bunnies are doing here, the topic was masturbation. So that's what I have to tell you. I'm going to end with a few words that have also been part of my strength. To suffer woes which hope thinks infinite, to forgive wrongs darker than death or night, to defy power which seems omnipotent, to love and bear, to hope till hope creates from its own wreck the thing it contemplates. Thank you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this with me. Thank you.